So many people of faith are concerned that expressing God's design for human sexuality might run afoul of the law. The Ruddock Review said New South Wales should make it unlawful to discriminate on the basis of a person's religious belief or activity. Would you support religious freedom protections in New South Wales? And before you answer that question, I'd love if the candidates could somehow, in one of the earlier questions, you referred to harmonisation, and you referred to the need to be consistent with federal law. Now we know that in the federal Parliament this issue has stalled, and so my concern, the question, would you support a religious freedom protections in New South Wales? I want to add to that, do you feel the need to wait until the Commonwealth acts, or would you be prepared to act before the Commonwealth if you were prepared to legislate for religious freedom in New South Wales? And we'll start, we've already picked everyone else, so I'll start with Mark Manasiak.
Yeah. Sure. I don't think we need to necessarily wait for the Commonwealth to act. You know, New South Wales has always been a state of leaders, so why don't we lead in a positive fashion? Look, I think it goes to a question of, it's basically attack on our personal freedom, our freedom of speech. And my party is a party of freedoms in all its dimensions. So we would oppose any attack on our right to speak out about what we see, you know, as something that we don't agree with. There's nothing more that I can really say other than that, you know, it's an attack on our freedom of speech, and we will fight tooth and nail that anyone that attempts to, you know, take away that right. You know, our society is built on a premise that, you know, everyone does have different of opinion. Everyone, you know, we are a diverse society, and just because someone has a different view to you doesn't mean that they should be pushed to the side or denigrated or disadvantaged. That is the beauty of the fabric of our society, is that, you know, we all have different views, we all come from different walks of life. You might not necessarily agree with it, but I will defend anyone's right to, you know, express their views, whether I agree with it or not. And they shouldn't be discriminated or punished for having a particular view.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just go straight to the end to Mark Latham and then come back to Greg and then finish with Paul.
Yeah, I've got very little faith in the Commonwealth processes because the Commonwealth legislation for same-sex marriage was hopelessly inadequate. It had no protection of religious freedom. Then Malcolm Turnbull sets up the Ruddock Review, and lo and behold, it's not a debate about religious freedom, it's another debate about the extension of gay rights. How did they get to that point? What's going on down there? It's just hard to believe, isn't it? That was the outcome, another debate about gay rights, in this case in schools. So I wouldn't be relying on Canberra one bit. As far as I'm aware, we're the only party that's released a comprehensive policy on human rights reform in New South Wales. We want to turn the Anti-Discrimination Board upside down and basically have protection against all the new forms of discrimination. You know, we've spoken about Christians copping it. Well, men are victims of discrimination in these insidious employment quotas. White people cop it now, it's fair game. Anti-white racism out there in the public arena, so-called white male privilege. I never saw any of that in Green Valley or Minto or Claymore or Ayres or Macquarie Fields. When I was growing up and representing them in the Parliament, I thought the typical person in my electorate who was doing it tough was the white bloke restructured out of manufacturing. How silly was I? He was an example of white male privilege. How were you to know walking through Claymore that was the case? You know, who would have thought? So, you know, these leftists have lost the plot, and we need new protections across the board. Okay, you can talk about minorities who copped it in the past. There's a new group copping it now, and we've got to broaden the scope of anti-discrimination laws so that nobody in society is discriminated against. All forms of prejudice are bad in society, and we've got to broaden the umbrella so everyone's protected.
Greg.
Yes, I support the answers that have already been given. It's important for us not to take a passive approach. We need to be active in ensuring that laws and policies adequately protect the well-being of Christians and other religious groups in our society. The discrimination legislation in New South Wales, as I mentioned, currently provides strong protection to religious schools, some religious tertiary institutions. So there isn't a problem there yet, but it's very likely the New South Wales Parliament is going to make changes in that in the next parliamentary session or the one after that to remove these protections. So we need to be on the front foot in making sure we'll defend religious organisations. At the moment in New South Wales, under that Act, there's no protection against religious discrimination with a few exceptions. So many people are arguing we should include religion as one of the grounds that is protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act. I'm supportive of that, but we need to be careful because it's more complex than it might seem, because it also may mean that religious organisations will have their ability to protect their religious ethos undermined. If you're a Christian school and you can't say no to a Buddhist who wants to be a maths teacher or an English teacher or some kind of ethics teacher at your school, it's more complex than it might seem than just saying we need to add religion to the Anti-Discrimination Act. That's a concern. Vilification laws are a concern as well. So Sonia Kruger, as you may know, she was taken to a tribunal recently. She was held not to have engaged in vilification for the comments that she made about stopping Islamic immigration, or at least temporarily halting it. But if you look at the case, the tribunal member didn't say Islam couldn't be a race. They said the two tribunal members, they said the term Muslims in Australia may be a race under the definition of race in the Act, but there's not enough evidence before us to reach that conclusion. So we may already have religious vilification laws in New South Wales, and there's many parliamentarians that want to introduce that, and religious vilification laws have shown to be adverse to the interests of Christians. Because when Christians want to promote their message, it's very easy for someone to make a complaint to a tribunal that what they're doing, the Christians doing, is engaging in religious vilification. We saw this in Victoria with the Catch the Fire case, where this happened. 2 Christian pastors were taken to a tribunal, eventually went to a court for what they said about Islam. So we shouldn't look at religious vilification laws as something that are necessary to protect Christians. They may ultimately have the exact opposite effect of undermining the religious freedom of Christians to express their views about Christianity and other faiths. So that's a concern. There's also a concern about government funding, as I was saying, that they may. We saw this recently with Tanya Plibersek, what she wants to do with abortion and public hospitals. We'll see this in many other situations as well. Government funding, use of government resources, and there'll be conditions attached to it that if you want to access these resources, you need to, say, adopt an equality policy, and the equality policy will have different principles which will be contrary to traditional Christian understandings of ethics. That's the third major challenge which we need to be upfront with, that government shouldn't be using our money, it's taxpayers' money, to undermine the ability of Christians to be true to their religious beliefs and only give them the funding if they'll accept conditions which are contrary to Christianity. So the simple answer is we can't just be passive, we have to be active, not just in the laws, but the policy and also in cultural change.
Thank you, Greg. We'll finish up with Paul.
It's good he answered some of the stuff in mine, but it's good that you hear that because it's really complex. It's not that easy. But the Christian Democratic Party, once we heard about the Ruddock report, once we've seen the response to the same-sex marriage issue in Feds and realised that the government wasn't going to honour any of those, we needed to move on it and at least do what we could to address New South Wales. So we introduced the Anti-Discrimination Amendment Religious Freedom Bill 2018, and of course this bill was to amend the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1977. Firstly, to prohibit discrimination on the ground of a person's religious belief and religious activities. Secondly, to prohibit public authorities and officials from subjecting faith-based entities to detrimental treatment on the grounds of faith, which Greg just spoke about. Thirdly, to provide the Act does not affect the appointment of persons by faith-based entities, the discharge of duties of chaplains, or certain other acts or practices of faith-based entities. And of course, secondly to that, certain conduct by persons who hold belief or conviction that marriage and family are based on the concept of a union between one man and one woman, or that a person can only be one of two genders, that is either male or female. And D, to make it clear that the proposed provisions about religious and faith do not give rise to any ground of complaint or appeal in relation to certain land use planning decisions by local councils. Now, what does all that mean? Well, really, it comes down to this thing, is that
Christians are the most persecuted group across the world. There's over 260 million people being persecuted for their Christian faith. So, you know, when we talk about who's been persecuted, we are the greatest persecuted group across the thing. So let's not be tricked about what's happening here, is that we have done something to try and protect our church interests, our faith-based interests. And this is all faiths, okay? It's not just us. It could be a Jewish hospital, or it could be some sort of kindergarten with another faith. And they don't want to entertain the gender diversity policy of the state government. And the state government say, well, if you're going to get grant funds, you have to tick this box. And that might mean you have to have these books in your library, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. This bill says, no, you can't make us do that, and then say we don't get the grant or the funding, okay? And another major part of this, because of time, is why do you have chaplains? I mean, you want PE, you get a sports coach. You know, if you've got a mental illness, you get a psychologist or someone that can address you. When you've got a spiritual health issue, you need chaplains, you need a priest, you need a reverend and pastor. You need someone that can minister to the spiritual thing. And I believe that actually if we had a lot more spiritual, those opportunities for chaplains to do what I've asked in school, where they could pray over people, there'd probably be a lot less mental health. And that's because it's a spiritual health issue, and we need holistic care. So that's what the Christian Democrats have done. We couldn't get it up in the upper house. We lost time, lost the momentum to be able to pull it off in the time. But with some of these wonderful men being elected, hopefully with myself, there's a new day on the horizon.